According to Peter Schiff, the impending economic collapse will be even worse and more devastating than the one that followed the 2008 financial crisis. He claims that if you have money in a bank, you will lose it. As for the U.S. economy right now, we're in a recession. According to Peter Schiff, the statistics may be altered in the future to corroborate that we are currently experiencing a recession. This is what happened during the Great Recession, which began in December 2007, but was prolonged for a year by the government's dissemination of fictitious economic data before ending in December 2008. When they came back, they mentioned that the recession had lasted for a full year. You can discard all the information we provided you because it was incorrect, and they might follow our lead. The largest decline in factory orders since the closure during the COVID-19 pandemic occurred today. Given this, it is difficult to argue that we are seeing a robust economy. It is important to rely on your own judgment rather than that of the government. I refuse to walk outside in the rain simply because a government weatherman keeps claiming it's sunny when it's actually pouring, he says. Powell is going to tell Congress that he's about to cut rates. In fact, the entire market is trying to guess how quickly and how much the Fed will cut. So the Fed is about to throw gasoline on an inflation fire that it lit. He says that you can see in the financial markets starting to happen. Recently, gold just hit a new all-time record high. What gold is telling you is that monetary policy is too loose, and the Fed needs to hike rates more. Political motives, according to Peter, are the reason the Fed halted rising, because it hasn't won the war on inflation. In fact, it's already given up. And if interest rates are lowered ahead of an election, that's just politics. If QE is reinstated, that's the same thing. Additionally, the government and the economy are being propped up for political reasons. The stock market is being propped up, the government is being propped up, and so on. Supporting inflated markets or a fictitious economy is not a smart idea. It is not advisable to support bankrupt banks. It's best to let the market resolve the issue. Allowing stock prices to decline and the economy to restructure while insolvent banks fail is a healthy thing. Because if we do that, we could emerge from it with a robust and viable economy rather than having to constantly battle inflation. Eventually, though, inflation takes center stage, and we've already reached that point because the Fed has used inflation to solve every other issue. Now that issue is going to get much worse. In 2007, the Fed reduced interest rates, but that didn't work this time either. Instead, we saw a small decrease in rates, and after the crisis, we naturally went all the way down to zero. We need to address the underlying causes of the issue, which include excessive government borrowing, spending, and regulation. Since these issues aren't being addressed, all we want to do is pump more air into each bubble. The problem isn't that interest rates are too high, rather they're too low, and raising them further won't solve anything. However, I believe that the Fed will eventually realize that inflation is here to stay and that fighting it will only cause too much collateral damage. As a result of the low interest rates that were maintained for an extended period of time, as well as the sheer amount of debt that we all owe, everyone will become insolvent. All of the crises are the result of poor monetary policy, and since the 2008 financial crisis, monetary policy has gotten considerably worse. As a result, the impending economic collapse will be far more severe and agonizing than the one that followed the 2008 financial crisis. We're not really focused on the economy, in my opinion. Rather, we're just thinking about spending and consumption, and we mistakenly believe that this is the economy. That is, the economy is what we generate, not what we consume. We are able to consume far more than we can generate because we are taking on debt, which is unsustainable given how much debt we currently have. Do you think we'll see another Great Depression? It might be worse than the one we had in the 1930s due to inflation, which caused consumer prices to drop significantly. This served as a buffer, helping to offset the higher unemployment rate. However, we must keep in mind that the Great Depression was solely the result of government policy. The free market would not have caused it. The Fed, the Hoover and Roosevelt administrations, and the Roosevelt administrations prolonged it until the Second World War ended. It began in 1929 and ended in 1946. It was a terrible economic period, and this time it will be even worse because the government has made a lot more mistakes and is probably going to make even bigger ones during this crisis. The majority of the money that we created is still in circulation. The supply hasn't fully recovered, but demand has increased due to a massive expansion of credit. People are using their excess cash from bank loans and government handouts to drive up prices. The major issue was that, in addition to telling people not to work, we also fueled demand by giving them checks to spend. In fact, many Americans received larger government checks for not working than they did for working, even though they were completely unproductive. This created a recipe for massive inflation, which we are currently experiencing. This is the worst time to be trying to force employers to pay workers more, because if you force them to work for $20 an hour, you can't get a job if you're not that productive and you're legally unemployable. The government prices people out of the labor market, who can now turn to AI, automation, and robotics. But the government always causes these issues. During the Great Depression, for example, the government pressured employers to keep wages high even as prices were falling, which led to a high unemployment rate. It would have been better if they had simply lowered wages. That way, they could have retained workers, but the wages wouldn't have actually decreased because the cost of living was declining. As a result, labor became too expensive. And as a result, businesses had to make cuts, which led to the layoff of employees. Now that employers are being pressured to pay their employees more, they won't do it. Well, they might overpay some employees if necessary, but only at the expense of firing a large number of workers. As a result, while some people are lucky enough to make the minimum wage, there are also losers who lose their jobs due to automation, which could result in even more losers, and of course, customers. The government's mandated higher wage costs have resulted in higher prices for all the goods and services that these workers help to produce. But once again, the people who suffer the most are those who are denied employment opportunities or who lose their jobs. More significantly, they are denied the chance to advance in their careers. It's very difficult to be considered unemployed these days, even if you don't have a job. If you've been unemployed for more than a year, they don't count you drop. Out of the statistics, that's crazy. You would think those people should count extra, because they can't improve their skills with on-the-job training because they don't get a job, and so they don't get the training. And many of them may end up turning to crime, which has all sorts of other negative implications for society. None of the government numbers are honest, Peter says, right? However, if I've been looking for work for 5 years and I still can't find one, why aren't you counting me as unemployed? I mean, if you have a job while you're looking for one, that counts as being unemployed. For example, if I'm looking for work every day, but work 1 day a week at McDonald's, that counts as being employed. Or if I drive for Uber in my spare time while looking for work, that counts as being employed. As a result, many people who would have been considered unemployed in the past are no longer counted, so it's not as though our unemployment rate is low. We simply don't accurately monitor it, much like we don't monitor inflation. Due to the way government statistics are intentionally designed to underreport the rate of price increases, taking rising prices and finding various ways to distort their rise. Inflation is actually much higher than what the government reports. This also implies that GDP figures are inflated, meaning that the economy is not expanding as quickly as the government claims. In fact, I believe the economy is contracting at the same time that the government claims it is expanding. There is an all-time high number of young adults living with their parents today. Most families haven't been able to make ends meet on a single paycheck since the 1960s because, prior to the 1970s and 1980s, married women did not work. In fact, it was embarrassing for husbands to take on a second job before permitting their wives to hold a first job, regardless of whether they were blue-collar or white-collar professionals. Blue-collar workers may have had a smaller home, fewer fancy automobiles, or fewer extravagant vacations, but they were still able to support a stay-at-home wife, mother, and raise their children. However, they were able to support their family, which included a wife who was not required to work and receive a paycheck. The 1970s saw such high inflation that the husband's pay could no longer support the stay-at-home mother, And this led to the increase in the number of married women entering the workforce. This was not women's liberation, despite what they would have us believe. They were freed when they were not required to work and could choose to do so. Instead, women are now forced to work without any choice. How is that liberation? However, the standard of living was lower because the husband was unable to support his wife, so she had to find work. This resulted in the husband and wife each having a job, but it wasn't enough. They now need more jobs, so they had to take on a second or third job. The next thing that will happen is that our young children will have to leave school and go to work, which is how it began before capitalism during the Industrial Revolution. We're going backwards now, but perhaps artificial intelligence, AI, can help push against that trend by increasing labor productivity, or in some cases, reducing the need for labor altogether, because we have computers that could think. You know, it's not just inflation. People had children because they needed the help on the farm. The family was working the land. However, capitalism increased labor productivity to the point where the father didn't need his kids to work or his wife to work. However, taxes rose significantly in the 1970s and 1980s. Even when Reagan took office, he made modest cuts, but not enough to make up for the losses from the previous decade. The government is constantly expanding and imposing an increasing burden on the population at the same time that capitalism is trying to ease that burden by innovating. Innovation is a force for good government. Innovation is a force for bad government. In fact, in many cases, when a wife got a job, she just earned what her husband paid in taxes, meaning the wife was working for the government and the husband was working for the family. Capitalism boosts output, improves quality, and lowers costs. Government, on the other hand, decreases quality and raises costs. Therefore, you would prefer more freedom and less government, but sadly, we've been going in the wrong direction. However, things are starting to change in Argentina right now. A free market libertarian president has taken office, cutting spending drastically, eliminating departments, and firing employees of the government. If they can accomplish this after a century of errors and poor policy that have impoverished a once incredibly wealthy country, then perhaps there is hope for us. The loss of a privilege that neither of those economic zones enjoyed made our prosperity false from the start because it was based on debt and the dollar's reserve status. We were able to support ourselves because we could afford to import record amounts of goods that we couldn't produce with the paper we printed. But when the dollar crashed, we were unable to do so, and the entire house of cards fell. From a political standpoint, this was a huge mistake in the short term. But as they say, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. We were being supplied with food by countries that hoarded dollars as reserves. We then penalized Russia for doing exactly what we wanted them to do, keep sizable reserves of US dollars rather than using them to drive up prices. They invested those dollars in US Treasury bonds, which helped us maintain our deficits without the need for Americans to purchase the bonds because the Russians were doing it so well. By punishing the Russians for doing this, we sent a clear message to the rest of the world that they could be next if they continue to do anything that the United States does not like. This is what will occur to you. And this is what I would do if I were Saudi Arabia or China. I get your message, but if I were India or anybody else, I would say, oh well, I'm not going to let what happened to Russia happen to me. The dollar is the source of our power and our quality of living. But I'm out of it, and I don't want it anymore. The globe is beginning to divest itself of dollars. What are they purchasing with the money they are selling? Since you can't get out of the dollar without investing in something else, they are purchasing gold. That is the reason why gold is at an all-time high today, even though people have been selling it for months. Central banks are purchasing gold in order to replace the dollar and are getting ready for a new gold standard in which gold, not US dollars, will be the primary monetary reserve asset that is held in reserve. People haven't woken up because they're too preoccupied with the cryptocurrency scam to realize what's happening with gold, but they also aren't paying attention to the wider picture of what this means for the US and the false prosperity we've experienced. Peter says that interest rates in Europe and Japan were too low, going negative even though these governments ran large deficits. As a result, everyone is paying the price for their mistakes. which they all made during the COVID-19 pandemic. Additionally, all of these countries are suffering from similar consequences as a result of their identical monetary and fiscal policy mistakes. Peter just believes that America is in a unique position to suffer more because we stand to lose far more. We hold the reserve currency, and that the U.S. will ultimately fare worse than either Europe or Japan. We have been able to export money that we print for the goods that everyone else produces. Money cannot be created. It requires a lot of resources to produce consumer goods. This is a major issue, and people are just walking by this cemetery. Nevertheless, I'm following Peter's instructions to the letter, telling people that they should buy silver rather than gold because it is still less than half of its record high. Although silver is quite inexpensive compared to gold, these people don't seem to know what they're doing. They are in charge of the money, and they know what the public is going to do. If you look at the ETF GLDN 9 weeks of consecutive outflows, a record, you can see that the public is clueless. Normally, the public buys high and sells low. If gold was making a high, they would be buying rather than selling. That's the dumb money. The smart money, on the other hand, is buying as much gold as they can get their hands on. Additionally, a lot of people may have sold their gold equities in order to purchase the Bitcoin ETFs. But the media is misleading the public by hyping about these fools go Bitcoin ETFs. Peter claims that I took advantage of this by investing a larger portion of my personal funds in gold equities. The price of gold is more than just a commodity. If it is truly rising, it is the canary in the coal mine, and you should flee from it immediately because bad things are about to happen. The FED and most investors are, of course, ignoring these warning signs, but the real question is whether the market will see through the smoke screen and realize that these are not loans, that this is permanent debt monetization, that America is a banana republic without the bananas, and that the dollar is depreciating due to government policies. Since the 2008 financial crisis, the entire banking sector is insolvent and depends on government support to survive. However, the government can only keep the banks afloat by inflating away the wealth of the people. As a result, the system is a house of cards built on a house of cards, and Peter warns that it may implode and that we will suffer as a result. If you have money in a bank, you will either lose it all or it will lose value. Either the bank fails and you are unable to withdraw your money from it, or the bank fails and you do receive your money. But even then, the amount you receive will not be sufficient to purchase much because the government will need to print more money to cover the loss. However, in any case, you lose, which is why I advise people to take their money out of the bank as soon as possible and invest it in something genuine, similar to what foreign central banks are doing with their dollars, converting them into gold. You could do that as well, but you could also build a larger portfolio that includes income-producing assets. Whether it's dividend-paying stocks or income-producing real estate, you need to buy real things because, in the end, that's all that's left when there is hyperinflation. The paper claims to wealth vanish, but what's left is the real thing. In the U.S., real estate prices will decline significantly, but it's difficult to predict how much in nominal terms because it depends on a number of local factors. The main factor supporting rising housing prices is the dearth of available inventory. Those who own a home and have a mortgage aren't selling. They can't move because everything else in their lives has become more expensive except for their mortgage, which hasn't increased. As a result, there aren't any properties for sale, and it's difficult to build new ones. Because of the high cost of labor and raw materials, there will be an increase in the number of homes available. Job losses will occur, and deaths will occur. People will continue to have reasons for selling their homes, so over time there will likely be an increase in inventory, which will raise replacement costs and continue to drive down building costs. This will make it more expensive to build and enable landlords to raise rent. Therefore, income-producing real estate, such as multifamily properties that appeal to tenants, may be the best option if you want to continue raising rents. You just need to make sure you do it in a state that supports landlords. You don't want to do this in one of these states where your renters can simply stop paying you and you can't kick them out. But I believe that inflation will push mortgage rates higher. We could see double-digit rates there. There's a real risk there, And if the Fed resumes purchasing mortgages, inflation will rise even further. Credit will dry up if rates aren't allowed to rise to a point where the lender would be compensated for what they're losing to inflation. But let's face it, this is a disaster that the government created, and it will refuse to take responsibility for it. However, it is one of the few products created in America that will be affected by this financial, economic, currency, and debt catastrophe, which will be worse than anything we have experienced since the Great Recession or the current era. As we've explored in this video, Peter Schiff's warning about an impending collapse worse than 2008 is based on several factors: unsustainable debt levels, overvalued stock markets, and the fragility of the global financial system. While some may dismiss these concerns as fear-mongering, history has shown us that economic bubbles eventually burst, and when they do, the consequences can be severe. It's crucial for investors to heed these warnings and take steps to protect their portfolios. Diversifying into assets like gold, silver, and other precious metals can provide a hedge against market downturns. Additionally, maintaining a conservative approach to debt and avoiding overly speculative investments can help weather turbulent times. However, it's not just investors who need to prepare. Governments and central banks also play a critical role in mitigating the effects of a potential collapse. Implementing sound fiscal policies, reducing debt levels, and fostering sustainable economic growth are essential steps to safeguarding against a financial meltdown. In conclusion, while the exact timing and severity of the next collapse are uncertain, Peter Schiff's warning serves as a valuable reminder of the risks inherent in our current economic system. By staying informed, diversifying portfolios, and advocating for responsible economic policies, we can better prepare ourselves for whatever challenges lie ahead. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more investing tutorials and insights. And remember, the key to successful investing is knowledge and preparation. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the upcoming video.